All right, well, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you join on our second workshop session. Last week we did the first one. We looked at a few of the OpenText API services, and this is a continuation of that. We're going to look at two APIs in today's session. We're going to go back and review the core, the capture service. We looked at one of the services available within the capture service. We're going to look at another one. And then we're also going to look at another new API service called RiskGuard. My name is Shahid Mithani. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager at OpenText. And our objective for these two sessions is to make sure that you have a good understanding of OpenText Cloud APIs, and we get you all ready and set to fully participate in our hackathon. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to walk through a few kind of overview related topics, and then we're going to dive right into an example that I've created to show you how to program those APIs. And then you'll have access to the code, to this recording, and also a guide that will help you set up this application at your end. So let's start off with sharing my screen. So I hope you can all see my screen.
Yeah, Shahid, that's all good.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so here I have the GitHub page where you can download this sample application that I'm going to showcase to you. We're calling it PII Data OT Demo. And I have written a fairly comprehensive README here that walks you through each and every step of setting up the application, and then being able to run it, and then how do you interact with the different elements of the application. It's a simple page, a single page application that calls all the different APIs. I've tried to purposely make it that simple so that the focus is more on the actual calls that are being made and on the code, as opposed to trying to navigate through multiple screens to showcase a particular use case. So we're trying to avoid all that complexity with this sample application. So you can read about all of read the overview in this README, and you'll have access to this URL. We'll post this on the Hackathon website. If I quickly go to the Hackathon website, there's a resource center page. And if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see that there's the video that we recorded last Thursday for the session we did. If you didn't have a chance to attend that session, please feel free to review this. And even in that video, we spent first 10 minutes kind of going over the overview of how to navigate through the developer website, the accounts, and there were some important takeaways that that might be helpful to you. And we'll post the links to this session as well on this page. Okay. Now, if I quickly go to the application, this is what it looks like. So I'm going to put this side by side with my code that I'm running on Visual Studio Code. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to mimic, or not mimic, but document this code in a way that there is a step number on the left side and the right side that correspond with each other. So the first step, like last time, is to obtain a token. Before I actually start that, just want to quickly show what the structure of the package that you're going to download from GitHub is going to look like. There are two elements to this application. There's a client-side application that I'm running through Visual Studio Code, but there's a server-side application as well. And the reason I have a server side is for the very last part, you'll see that it says send to database. And so what I'm going to show to you is whatever data that we're going to extract from a document, we'll go through that, of course, in greater detail, but that data I'm actually then entering into a database. And so I wanted to demonstrate how that is all possible. again, step by step, we'll go through each, and then I will walk you through each and every setup and steps to run this sample application. So starting off, we're going to obtain a token. And to obtain a token, we need a few credentials. Those credentials you would have been able to obtain during your trial sign up. Now, if you have any questions related to that, or if you're not entirely sure about whether you were able to capture all the right information during the trial sign up, I can quickly kind of show you where you might need to go. So let me just quickly go to developer.opentext.com. That's the page that we've created for the developers that has all the information about our APIs. And like last time I had mentioned, we offer all our APIs as a bundle called Information Management Services, but our software products also come with APIs that can be used to integrate our software products into your applications. And those APIs you'll be able to learn more about through these two options at the bottom. But for most part, you would want to focus on the information management services. Now, if you already have a developer account, you're going to see these two options on the top that says console. We had an older version of console. Some people still comfortable with that, but I would recommend if you're just starting off with OpenText APIs, then just to use the new console and then click on OpenText, the North American build and test environment. And this will take us into the admin center. And this is where you will be able to see all the different elements that have been created for you during the trial. So if you've missed anything during the trial setup, you can always go back into the admin center and capture all the information that you need to. So at the topmost level, when you set up yourself with a trial, you create an organization that represents your organizational account. And within that, you will be by default assigned a tenant. And tenant is a way to separate data. If you're building multiple applications or if you're serving multiple clients with your applications, you can create multiple tenants where you can separate logically the data for each of your client or each of your applications. By default, you only get a single tenant gets created when you sign up for the trial. And the 90-day trial only allows you to create one tenant, but when you do sign up for the test plan or the production plan, then you'll be able to create multiple tenants. So the default tenant gets a default name called tenant1. If I click on that, I will see the tenant ID on the top. There you go. So that's one of the credentials that you need to log in into, not to log in, but to obtain a token to make API calls. And the username you'll be able to view when you go over here on the right side. I have the profile icon over here. I can see that this is the username that's being used for this tenant. So that's your username. And the password we don't display over here, obviously for security reasons. But if you're not sure if you have your password correctly written down, you can always reset your tenant password. And this is your tenant password, mind you. This is not the password for your developer account. So when you're logging into the developer website on developer.opentext.com, that's a separate password. This is just the password for your tenant. So if you're resetting this, this only affects your tenant user. And to help you understand, when I say tenant users, within the tenant, you can create multiple users who would only have access to this tenant, meaning only access the data that resides in this tenant. So I have a few different users. The bottom one is the one that is my default user. And so when I'm changing the password, this is the tenant user whose password I'm changing from here. Okay, so I hope that helps. One of the other things I want to quickly highlight, and I will also post this on the developer community, is the fact that one of the other elements of authentication that you will require to be able to access your APIs is an app. Now, app is like creating a subscription. It's like a gateway to all the APIs. So irrespective of which tenant you're using, you create one app. Some people like to call it subscription. And then you can assign that app to whichever tenant you want the app to be able to access. So, if I go all the way back to the top level in the admin center, I can go into the apps option on the left side. I can create a new app over here. And then I can say, okay, assign this app to tenant 1 or 2 or 3, whichever I want. So when you go into the tenants after that, you'll see that under tenant 1, I have these 2 apps associated. Okay, so one of the other credentials, again, that you need to access the APIs, in addition to the tenant credentials, is the app credentials. So anytime you create an app, there would be a client ID and a client secret. And you will be able to see those credentials when you create the app. It'll display and it'll give you the option to save that information. So just to quickly summarize, you need your tenant ID, the username and password associated with the tenant, and then the app client ID and the client secret for that app. Okay, these 5 credentials is what you need. Again, if you have any questions, you can post a question. I'm gonna, again, like I said, I'm gonna put a post to make sure that this information is clearly available and you can follow that easily. So let's go back to, and I'm gonna hide my floating panel for Zoom. Going back to the application that I've written. So first step is to obtain token. Again, I'm going to try and put these side by side with my code in Visual Studio. Okay, so step 1, this is the function that handles the token. And you can see all the credentials that I'm passing to make a request to obtain a token. So once I've received the token, I'll need to attach this to any API calls that go to our cloud server. Now, the next step is one of the APIs that I want to showcase. It's called RiskGuard service. There's some really nice documentation on RiskGuard. Let me quickly, there you go. And what RiskGuard service does, and it's a very powerful service, it lets you identify any sensitive or any content that has risk associated with it. And that content can be text, can be image, can be audio, can be video. So this is a very powerful tool or a service where sometimes organizations need to meet certain corporate compliance in terms of what documents and what's in the documents that get stored within your organizational systems and databases. So this service helps in that regard, helps any document that you scan and upload or capture. You can use RiskGuard service, and then it'll tell you, okay, this document that you just uploaded, it has images of weaponry or alcohol or drug, or it has text that is that shouldn't be there. There's content that's high risk and should be it's going to let you then decide what you want to do before you decide to store the document within your system. So a very powerful service and a very simple service. It's just a single call, and it any kind of input in terms of text, audio, video, and or images. So here, what we are trying to demonstrate and work with is a lab report. Since the hackathon that you all are participating is related to healthcare, I decided to use a lab report which which may have some sensitive information, some PII information. And so let me just go to that. So on the right side, you'll see that this is the lab report I've taken as an example. Has a lot of data. So one of the other things we're going to do in the next step is to extract all of that data and then later on put it into a database. But for RiskGuard service, what we want to do is we want to see what kind of PII or personally identifiable information is there on this document. And usually it's like person's name, address, phone number, and so on. So if I were to upload that file to RiskGuard, so let me first select that file. And this sample is also included on GitHub with the package. So the process file is that call to RiskGuard. Again, let me switch back to the code. That's step number 2. I'm calling it 2B over here. Let me minimize this part. This is the call that I'm making. This is the URL that I'm constructing, and you'll see that it's just a simple call called process. And it'll take whatever content you want to test or send to RiskGuard. You'll be able to send it. And so I'm going to hit process. That's the call that's making. Again, let me put it on the side. And it's a very quick process. It says the process has succeeded, and it did bring back certain data because I'm trying to look for PII information. And here I'm just displaying the information that came back. Okay, so the information that came back, it found a phone number, address, name of, this is the name of the doctor actually on the lab report. And this is the name of the lab. And this is the name of the patient. Okay, so very simple call, but a very powerful service. Okay, next, let's move on to the other service that we want to look at, which is the capture service. Last time we looked at the capture service, we were looking at doing OCR on a document. So we were converting an image, a document that was scanned as an image. We uploaded it and used the OCR service to turn it into a text searchable PDF. This time we're going to go a little bit more complex. And what we want to do is we want to upload this lab report and want to extract the information from this lab report in this step. And then we want to see what information it was able to extract. Okay, I'm going to run through this step, and then I'm going to show you exactly what it took to put this all together. Okay, so let's select the same file that we selected in the previous step. We're going to pick up the lab report. Okay, and then we're going to upload it. Now, if we look at the code that corresponds to this, this is going to be step 3B in the code. Here is the URL that I'm calling, and all we're doing at this step is just uploading this file to the capture staging area. Like we had done in the previous session, anytime you want to call any capture service, you load up the file into the capture staging area, and then you can run whatever operation you want on that document. So here we're uploading the file to the staging area. And again, when we are loading anything or uploading anything, in the beginning, we talked about the tenant and how we are using tenant to create logical separation for our data. This is going to that tenant 1 that we looked at. Okay, anything that gets uploaded in it is in that tenant. So we can control what gets uploaded into our tenant and who then has access to that tenant. So now it's going to the capture staging area. It gives me a new file ID. And the next step is to actually call the extract API. And this is the API call that I'm making in this next step, and it's called classify extract page. So it's going to, this service is going to, first of all, identify what kind of document it is, and then it's going to process it based on what it knows about that type of document. We'll go into the details of how we went about setting it all up in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to make this call and show you how it was able to extract all this information that you see on the right and bring it back to me in that API call. So it is a resource intense call. There's a lot of processing going on, but now you can see all the data that it has been able to find over here. Okay, and so it found the patient name, the physician's name, the accession number you see over here. date collected, date received. So all of this, I didn't say anything in my API call how to process this, but that all setup has been done beforehand, and I'll show you how it was done. And of course, this whole big table with all the lab data, it's all over here, okay? And it goes row by row, and it's like in an array. Okay, so how did we go about, training capture service of how to process this? Let's go back to the admin console, the admin center. Okay, within the admin center, let's go into our tenant again. Okay, sorry about those messages. If I go into the tenant and then into the apps, I'll see that one of the apps that by default gets allocated to the tenant is Core Capture. Okay, and you click on Core Capture, it'll tell you a little bit about the app, but what you really want is the link to the web application, the web Core Capture application. There is there's a minor defect that has been logged, and the developers are fixing it, which is the URL that it generates. It adds this part about the admin that it shouldn't. If you just erase that, then that's this is where you're supposed to land. I did post this correct link to Core Capture web application in GitHub in the README. So you can also access over here. You can also access that same link. When I click over here, it'll take me to the same page as before. Okay, so now that I'm over here, what I need is my tenant ID to log in. Okay, because now it's asking me, okay, give me the tenant ID that you want to log in. So let's just head back and capture this tenant ID that I had mentioned earlier. I can copy it and I can then paste it over here. And then it's going to ask me the tenant username and password. And I'm using the same tenant username and password that I used to log into, that I showed over here that we're using for our API calls. Okay, so we're using the same tenant ID, the username and password as we are for our API. So let's enter username and password and sign in. And over here, by default, right now you get 3 sample profiles. These 3. There's a 4th one that I'm in the process of having it added as a sample. So it should be available next week. But this is the profile that I created to process the lab report. And when I click over here and how I created it and uploaded, I'm going to show that to you shortly. But once it gets uploaded, you have to train it 2 or 3 times. You have to select the file that that'll help Core Capture the AI behind the scenes to understand what does that document look like. So again, I'm picking up the same lab report, and it's going to first try and classify it. And at the bottom, once it's classified, it's going to tell me what type of document it thinks this document is. All right, so we'll leave it. All right, so it says it's a DNA stool analysis, which is correct. All right, and next, what we do once it's done the right classification, if it hasn't classified, you can go into organize. If it hasn't classified it correctly, it'll show all the documents that you've uploaded, and then it'll give you the option to do the classification over here. Or by default, right now, since I've already trained trained AI, it's able to classify it correctly. Okay. Let's move on to the next step, which is now it's going to review the document. And as part of designing the document type, again, we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. I've defined the different fields of data that I want to extract from it. And what I then trained through this web app is, where to find that data. So let's go into review documents. And on the right side, these are all the fields that I have defined. Now, I had to go through a couple of iterations. Okay, patient name, you need to pick from here. Okay, so you can actually, as you move your cursor, it'll kind of highlight all the data elements in green, and you can say, okay, this is the one that represents patient name. Then you go to the next field, physician name, and right now by default, you can see that it's successfully able to determine, okay, this is where physician name is. But of course, the AI was trained to go and look for the patient name over there. Same thing for rest of the fields. The accession number is over here, date collected. So as I go through each of the fields, you can see that those data elements on the document gets highlighted, right? So this is a very powerful tool. Once you've trained it, it successfully is able to pick up all the data. So the lab name, if you see, it's coming from the very bottom. So I trained the capture service to look for the lab name at the very bottom. The address is at the top. And then the most critical part is the table. That's a big table with a lot of data. And this column over here, most of the time it doesn't have any data, and then suddenly there's some data. Okay, so that was, again, it was the AI was trained to read the data in that manner. So now you can see that there's actually a table corresponding to this whole table in the document. The first column is the name, then the result, then the expected field, and then the indicator is everything that's over here. That's indicator. So as you can see, all the data has been correctly picked by Core Capture here. Okay, as I scroll down, this is all the data that it picks. It's a lot of information. And then the next thing is just to again, we're using this app to train the AI that's in Core Capture. So we've already gone through this exercise a few times. So again, I'm going to submit it, but it gets recorded as, okay, this is how you want the capture Core Capture needs to interpret this document. Okay. Now let's look at how I built or designed that whole profile. Okay, that I call lab report. When you go into Core Capture, you will be able to download Core Capture Designer from this screen over here. Okay, and once you install that Core Capture Designer, this is what it looks like. Okay, and there are three parts to it that you will need to create for any new document that you want Core Capture to be able to process. The first is the profile. So I created a profile called Lab Report Information Extraction, and this is exactly what you saw on that web app. I can double click it and I can show you what it looks like. So there's some settings. A lot of it, the default settings are good, but you might want a few things done differently. I'm going to go to the document type next. Within that profile, you can have different types of documents. You can define different types of documents. The one that I defined is, I've called it DNA stool analysis. And when I open it, it takes a second or two to open. Try again. All right. Here are all the fields that I've defined. And I've told it, okay, what's the data type, whether it's editable or not, or should it be read-only, and so on. So again, and the label name and so on. So for each field that you want to pull, or each data element you want to pull from the document, you will be creating kind of a variable over here. All right. And that's how all the fields that you saw on the right side, they appear. And then in the web app, you say, okay, for this field, pick the data from here, and it's able to make a note of where to go to pick the data for each of the fields once you've identified them. Okay, and this pathogens, this is the table. Okay, this is all the 4 columns in the table. And the last part is the recognition project. So related to that data type. So it's an information. There are 2 types of recognition. There's information extraction and there's advanced recognition. The one that I've used is information extraction. Now, you can read all about this in the help that's available over here. I'm going to just cancel this for now. If you click on the top right corner, there is a very comprehensive help. Okay, help or guide that's available over here. So you can access it from there. Again, just quickly going back to the recognition project, you can see that these are all the fields that I have created as part of that document type. Okay, all right, we'll stop here. Again, if you have, if you have questions, you can always post it into the developer community forum. But do look at the guide. It's very comprehensive. You'll be able to find answers to most of your questions over there. We're going to head back to our app. Okay, and let's look at the code. Okay, so it extracted all the data. And the very last part is inserting into a database. And that is my step number 4 in the code on the right. Okay, and for that, I have installed MySQL server on my local machine. And I had to run a server-side application. So what this call does, it makes a call to the server-side application and sends all of this data that was captured in the previous step. So if I just look at our code structure, you'll see there is an app server file. And this is the file that receives all of receive the data from the client-side application. Okay, and then and then I have all these different variables to capture all the data or extract and store all the information that I need to insert into the database. Of course, there's a lot of information over here, but what I want to know is, I'm just going to scroll back up over here. But what I want to capture is the name of the field and the value. Okay, and then of course there's a huge table, and there's an array of table within this array that represents all of the lab data. On all of that gets stored in these 4 array variables. And once I execute this, it sends, I have a server-side app running over here. When I hit submit, it's going to insert another, there are 2 tables that I've created in the database. Let me actually show you in the GitHub. I've actually provided details of this part of setting up the database. The package contains scripts to create the database and the tables. Okay, so there are 2 tables that I created for this sample application. So again, let's send this to the database. When I send it, it successfully adds, sorry. Okay, I should have not clicked on the console because I kind of paused the operation there. Okay, so it added report ID number 48. So it took this data and created a new record in the database with the report ID, which is the primary key of the record. Number ID is 58. I use the SQL Workbench to kind of see what's in the database, or to run the scripts as well to set up the tables. As you can see, the database that I created, I called it IAM services DB, and then the 2 tables I have here is lab reports and the lab report pathogen. So if I go to the lab reports, since I was the console said that the report ID is 58, I can look for that record over here, and here is the primary record for that lab report, and then the whole table related to the lab report that was in that lab report. Again, we can reference it with the foreign key of report ID, and here is all that data. So you can see, if I put this side by side with the my apologies for the sluggishness here of the screens. You can see on the left side is all of the data that was extracted from this lab report. Okay, so this is what I wanted to demonstrate to you in this example of the powerfulness of our capture service. And before that, we looked at also the risk guard service and how you can create a template to extract data from any document, and then you can then insert that document into a database or whatever else, however else you want to handle that data. So I'm going to stop over here. I think we were trying to wrap this up in half an hour, but we've definitely gone over. And we can maybe spend 5 minutes to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Shahid, for the session. And now I'll open up the session for Q&A. So if you have any question, do drop them in the Q&A section. And in the meantime, I'm going to read out the question that we got in the chat section. So for those of you asking for a recording, yes, we are going to share the recording with you soon over. All right, so I'm gonna start with the first question, which is about if participants are getting any credits for API calls.
Well, we would like you to use for the hackathon to use try using at least two API services, two different API services. So if I were to go back to the hackathon website, give me 1 second. I'm just going to hide this floating bar. So if I go back to the hackathon page, you'll see that there are these APIs listed. And of course, all of these are also APIs that are on our developer website. You can read about all of these APIs. So try to use at least two of the services. Let me just quickly go back to the developer website. Okay, now you go into Explore, and then when I open the product section, so these APIs, there's 7 of them over here. We would like to see you try at least 2 of these services, and if you can demonstrate more the merrier. But obviously, there's a goal for each challenge, and you have to meet the goal of that challenge. You have to demonstrate through your application that if you met that goal, and minimum of 2 services is what we're looking for.
All right, so the question is, how can I start as a newbie to master this?
Good question. So I had briefly touched on this in my first session last week, but what you want to do is, again, go to developer.opentext.com, go into the Explore Information Management Services, and then start off with the overview, create a developer account, sign up for the trial, go through the developer concepts, and one of the other things I had mentioned last time is our API Swagger documentation is fairly robust and interactive. You can actually test some of the API calls right from this page. There's an authorized option over here, which actually will get the token for you. Just have to pass all the credentials that you would do when you're making the API calls. Look for the URL that says dev, or I'm just going to scroll back up because this is the page for authentication for all environments. So we just got to scroll back up. So here you go. So there are 3 different authentication options for dev environment, which is the environment that we're working on with the trial account. Look for NA1 dev in the URL. And then once you have the token, then you can make any of these API calls. You kind of expand this section and use the option to try it out. If there are any fields that you need to populate, it'll show those fields, put in the parameters, hit execute, and then it'll bring back the response. And there are some sample responses listed here that will give you an idea of what each of the response type means. So this is a good place to start, and then just start building. And if you have any questions, post your questions on the in the developer community, and we're going to try and help you, to succeed.
30 seconds to quickly visit. You can just visit the hackathon page. And a lot of you have questions regarding the last date. So that's mentioned in the hackathon page itself. The hackathon ends on September 15th or 16th, depending on your time zone. So that's the last date for making a project submission. So thank you, Shahid, for the wonderful session.